What's going on, guys? It's Brandon here, Brothers of Merit. Got Taylor with me as usual. What's up, man?
What's up, brother?
Not much. We got a interview tonight that was just off the charts to Taylor and I. It was Colonel Charles Causey. He is a Army chaplain, just an amazing man, awesome interview, great content, and we loved having him. So before we get into that, Taylor, can you hit the guys with the routine housekeeping?
Absolutely. So as always, starting things off by just saying thank you. As we said last week, we've seen an incredible amount of support, and to God be the glory with all of that. So we wanted to just go through and specifically thank everybody that is giving us a rate and review on iTunes. As we have said before, that helps us out incredibly, so we wanted to specifically call those people out. So thank you to Zachary Dean, Paul Brown, Martin Winters, Farmer Stan, Dude P, you know who you are, Carrie M, Atlee Joe, and Joel Cook.
Our boy.
And so, as always, you can check us out on Instagram. That's where we have most of our information, like our recent giveaway for the Steve Chapman books that we gave away from last episode. And so find us there at brothers_of_merit, and that's where you can find all the information about upcoming episodes and things like that. So that's the source of information for that.
Yep. And real quick, Taylor and I were looking at the stats of our listeners, and we thought it was pretty cool that all of our Australian and European fans that are listening to us, just a shout out to you guys. We really appreciate it. And if you could, find our email on the website and send us one. We'd love to hear from you. We love your support, and we just think it's pretty neat that from across the world you guys are supporting and listening to us. So
yeah, we'd love to hear your story and get to know you. So that's brothersofmerit.com. You can find both of our emails. Shoot us an email.
Absolutely. So to get into the interview, like I said, we had Colonel Charles Causey. He is a Army chaplain, and we loved having him. He hit on some things that Taylor and I, just looked at each other and said, wow. The book that he has, The Words and Deeds, it's an amazing book with an assessment in it that really hit home for Taylor and I, and we did it together, and we think all of you guys should be involved. So if you hang out till the end, we'll give you the ways to connect with that and how to find that assessment and all. So we'll get into it now and shoot for the interview.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely some moments just jaw-dropping, like chills, and it was great. So stick around for the whole thing. It's awesome.
All right, let's take him into the interview.
See you on the other side.
All right. All right, Colonel Charles Causey, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Glad to be on the show.
Yes, sir. Thanks for coming on. We were very interested in your book, Words and Deeds, and also your background as an Army chaplain. We have a lot of listeners that either are currently in the military or have had a military background, or listeners that are just curious about military service if they haven't served before. So I know this is going to be a great episode, and our listeners will be able to get a lot from it.
Super. Looking forward to it.
So just starting off, if you could, give everyone just a quick background on yourself, your testimony, where you grew up, just something about you that they can look into and know what they're listening to and all.
Sure. I grew up in a town in Kansas, and I would say I grew up in a Christian family, but I never understood the essentials of the gospel and salvation until I got to college. Even though I had spiritual experiences in the church that I grew up in, the pilot light wasn't lit yet. And it was being introduced to a ministry called Campus Crusade for Christ, which is now Cru. I got involved, and there was just one night in my dorm room, I read through the 4 spiritual laws, and I prayed to God. I said, you've been a part of my life, my whole life, and but this is an eternal decision. I have to make sure. So I just want to accept your forgiveness and salvation and have you enter my life as my Savior and Lord. And then immediately I read through, they call it the Blue Birdie booklet on how to be filled with the Holy Spirit that Bill Bright had put together, and read through that booklet and prayed that I wanted to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And I did see, lightning didn't strike, but as I look back now, and even when I look back a year later, I could see just a big difference. I started living for other people and just really began to have a heart for people. I think one of the miracles that God did in my heart was remove some of my selfishness. He's still working on it. Just through being married and having kids, I reveal to myself I have more and more selfishness that needs to be crucified. But So I went through college and just had a great time. Mission trips, sharing Christ with people in the dorms, and it was a phenomenal movement of God that was happening. I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado, and we probably had 400 students in small groups, and we just saw the Spirit working in amazing ways on campus and on mission trips and in changing people's lives, and just the dorms just being in the fraternities and sororities and just people living off campus, just a big turn for the Lord. It was just incredible to be a part of that. And I decided to go on staff with Campus Crusade after college because of that experience. And I did that, and then I became a youth pastor and an associate pastor. And then I realized that I never had any Bible classes. I basically had studied molecular biology in college. So I thought a good businessman should know his pots and pans. So I went to seminary. I had 3 kids at the time, didn't have a job, didn't have a place to stay. We moved to Chicago. I went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And while I was there, I met an Army recruiter, and he said, "Hey, why don't you become a chaplain?" And it sort of changed the whole direction of my life. I left seminary and became a pastor for 5 years, but I joined the Army Reserves, and then I got deployed overseas to Iraq. And when I came back, I just felt that sense, that urging from God that I needed to continue on active duty. So I called the Pentagon and talked to the chief of chaplain's office, and they said, "Yeah, we're short chaplains. We'd love to have you." And so ever since 2007, 2008, right in there, I've been active duty with the Army.
Okay. And was your father a Army chaplain as well?
He was, yes. My dad was an Army chaplain, and I never, growing up, even though I loved my dad and my mother and father, and I appreciated the fact that he was an Army chaplain, I never saw myself as going into ministry. There was nothing appealing. I didn't want to be a pastor. I didn't want to be in church that much. It seemed like the family business, and I kind of had a repulsion to it until I got to college, and I realized my need for salvation and the desire to develop that personal relationship with the Lord.
Now, is your father, if he's not alive, I apologize, but did he ever, give you any advice, or did he ever show you any signs that he wanted you to go into the chaplaincy field and to become one?
No, he actually, it's funny. He told me, I look back, I laugh, but he said, if I can do anything else in my life besides ministry, he said to do it. And he didn't mean that because he was burned out. I think he meant that now that I look back. He has Alzheimer's now, and I'm not able to ask him some of these questions, but I think he meant that, if God has called you, there's nothing else you can do with your life.
Right.
But if you're at the point when there's nothing, that you can do something else and be content, it could save yourself a lot of misery in trying to find God's will for your life, perhaps, So I look back on that and think it sounds really bad, but maybe it was very wise. So.
Yeah. So you mentioned in there that you went to seminary you had 3 kids at the time.
I did. And then a year into it, I had a 4th born. We have 4 children.
Wow. So that was probably a pretty busy time in your life, I would say.
Yeah, it was brutal, to be honest with you. I worked a graveyard shift at a security firm, it was at a Fortune, I think it was a Fortune 500 company, but they hired mostly seminary students. We had about 60 seminary students that worked security for this large corporation. And so I started out working a graveyard shift for the first year. So I would go immediately from my graveyard shift to the seminary campus and be busting in Greek and Hebrew and exegesis classes. And I would get home, spend a few hours with my wife and kids. And then my wife had designed a room in the house where she could, it was all dark. She had covered over the window and stuff so I could go to bed while it was still sunny out. Wow. And she would put the kids to bed, and then I would get up at maybe 11 p.m. and then do it again. And thankfully that only took place for a year. And then I got promoted, became a supervisor, and I had more of a weekend schedule. But it just seemed like every day through that I had to pull off a Herculean effort. I felt like God was just giving me one day at a time, just seize the day. He's given me enough power and strength for that day. And if I started worrying about the future, I would have a collapse. I'd have a breakdown. And that was when I really learned to just trust God one day at a time. And he's given me the energy and strength each day. But yeah, it was hard. And I was also in the Army Reserves at that time.
Wow.
Drilling one weekend. So I had a job and a half plus full-time seminary. And I'd asked my wife, I said, hey, do you want me to slow down so I can have more time with you and the kids? And she's like, no, it's too painful. Just get through it.
Right.
And by the grace of God, in 3 years of full-time school, I graduated with a Master's of Divinity from Trinity.
Wow. That's incredible. And that right there is, if we could stop the podcast right now, like that is an incredible, like, testimony and just, I guess, a word that, like, from the Lord and, like, how we should be living our lives, like, daily, just striving after him to get us through every day. That's incredible. I love that.
Yeah, I had my Bible redone at the bindery there underneath the library, and I had them put on there Carpe Diem. And a lot of people that see on my Bible it says Carpe Diem, they think I'm just a fan of the Dead Poet Society and Robin Williams movie, but I just felt like I had to seize my Bible every day. I had to seize every day and just really take advantage of the opportunities God gave me. And there was time in every day to kind of manage everything. It's not the ideal life, and we looked forward to a better future, which we found. But God does sustain us when we trust him.
Wow, that's amazing. So, fast forwarding now that you've been in the military, active duty for a really long time, is there any, stories that you could share with our listeners that really stand out to you? Just instances you've had in your military service where God has really shown himself to you and really shown himself to the soldiers that you have served, and how he's worked through you to serve them?
Absolutely. There's one story that is just, I still haven't got my mind around yet. I had one of the commanders that was in Iraq that I work with. He had a violent temper, and he was really loud and used a lot of profanity, and people didn't like to be around him. And I approached him one day. He was yelling, and it's funny, the staff, they immediately started leaving when they saw me come in, and he was like, you may not want to be around me, Chaplain. I'm really upset right now. And anyway, everybody left. I said, hey, can we take a walk together? And he said, I guess. And we walked outside, and I said, why are you so upset? What's going on? And he said that he had lost some radios, some equipment, Army equipment. And he said that his commander was actually going to issue a statement of charges against him. And it was going to look bad for him and being in command and being overseas and everything. And I said, hey, can I pray for you to find that equipment? Can I pray for you to find those radios? He said, if you think it'd do any good. I said, well, it can't hurt. He goes, sure enough. So I just bowed. We just stopped right there. I don't think he bowed his head or closed his eyes or anything, but I just prayed for him. And I just said, God, please help this commander to find this military equipment so he won't get in trouble and he'll have a good deployment. And anyway, he went his way. I went mine. I forgot about the whole thing. It was just one of the things you do every day. And about a week or two later, he came bursting into the chapel, and he'd never set foot in the chapel. We had a chapel by the Tigris. It was called Tigris River Chapel, and our fob was, I don't know how close it was to Tigris River, but they called it Tigris River Chapel. So he came bursting in there and just said, Chaplain. And he goes, God found my radios. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, they were turned into the MPs. And he said, your prayer worked. He said, let's what do we need to do? I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, obviously there's a God. And do we need to be in a Bible study? Or so? I said, sure. So it was incredible. We met most Monday nights then for the rest of the deployment, and we went through the Gospel of John together. And I watched God transform a human heart, and it was really amazing. It was really, you can just see the change in his demeanor from before that experience and after. So that was really exciting. And so I went back to Paul Harvey to hear the rest of the story. I moved back to Minnesota where we had been pastoring, and I ended up going active duty, and the Army had relocated my family to New Jersey from Minnesota. And I was asked to speak that first year. So this was in maybe the fall or the fall of 2008 or the spring of 2009. And I was asked to speak in a little country church. And I preached on prayer. And I used that story just as an example. I talked about how God can use even simple prayers, little prayers. It's not we have to pray in the King James and we have to make sure we get all the details right. we could just bring our requests before God and he can answer them. And I used that. So anyway, got out after the service, and I was in the parking lot, and a man approached me, and he said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about your sermon." I said, "Sure." And he said, that story you told, he goes, "When were you in Iraq?" And I told him the year. And he said, "And what fob were you on?" And I told him that. And he said, "And about what month was it that this happened?" And at this point, I thought he was going to try to discredit my story somehow, right. Say, well, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But instead, he did just the opposite. He unveiled, there in the parking lot, right before I got in my car that afternoon, he unveiled to me this story. He had been a civilian contractor working for the Department of Defense, and he was on the same fob as I was at the same time, which in itself is incredible that I would meet him in a rural church in New Jersey. But he was walking by a dumpster, and he saw some boxes in there, and he thought, well, that's weird. They were like brand new boxes, and so he went over and investigated, and he found it was military equipment. Some of it was radios and some other things.
No way.
And he took the equipment and he went and he turned it into the MP. And from our calculation, it was about the same time that this commander had his radios turned in. And I believe that God allowed me to meet the man that actually had done that. And I sort of close out, I debated with my publisher whether we should put that story in or not, because I'm not a big fan of people just telling their, big spectacular stories and saying everybody can live like this. But the publisher just felt like it really hit the mark with what I was trying to do. And I felt like, the words that I said that day for the commander, the prayer I gave, and then the good deeds of that man, because he, who looks in a dumpster, first of all, but then a lot of people could have stolen it and sold it for profit, or they could have left it there. They could have given it to a buddy, or, there were just so many things, but he just decided to do good that day. And I just felt like that was really what the book is about. Words and deeds are both so crucial for our lives here on planet Earth. And it's just a miracle that, moving across the country, being asked to preach, that God would allow that man to be in that church at that time. It's just incredible to me.
Absolutely. And I tell you, for anyone out there listening that is questioning their faith, questioning, God, or I'm a story like that, Taylor and I are sitting here just looking at each other like, I can't believe the full circle that God played in that and showed back to, the end of you meeting the man that answered the prayer, you know what I mean, to help the man you saved in the Army. Like, that's amazing.
Right, like I was sitting here like, okay, like I know where this is going, and that just hooked so hard in like a way that only God could have been a part of it. Like that is awesome.
Yeah, I told the man, I said, he goes, I sure was surprised to hear that story today, because you'd imagine him sitting in church and hearing about that, and then he connected all the dots first, but then he wanted to be sure, so he walked out to me and allowed me to connect the dots, and he goes, I was sure surprised. And I said, I'll bet you were. That's just so awesome. Thanks for being faithful. I said, thanks for doing a good deed. It's a lesson to all of us. We have no idea what God does with any of our words and deeds here. He can take things we've said to people. I've had people come up to me years later and say, hey, do you remember when you told me this? I was like, no. He said, oh, well, it kind of helped me change my life, change the direction of my life. I'm like, well, praise God, I'm glad. He goes, yeah, you said this right at the key time. And I think in heaven, when we get there, that God's gonna unveil this amazing mosaic of ways that we have connected with other humans and ministered to them in ways that we could never imagine. And I'm so excited to be a part of that. And people have ministered to me and helped me along the way, and they've never seen how they've impacted my life, and I hope that'll be an encouragement to them too.
That's amazing. And you mentioned in there words and deeds, which we'll talk about your book now. What inspired you, besides obviously a story like you just told us? What else inspired you to write this book, Words and Deeds?
Well, to be honest, some of it was, I outlined in there, and you mentioned at the beginning, 4 kinds of men. And God, I was leading a Bible study down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, some soldiers and some civilians, and I put together in a graph, what if words was on this horizontal axis and deeds was on a vertical axis, and it looks like maybe there'd be somebody with maybe no words, no deeds. What would that look like? And I started playing around with different things, and I realized that this actually works for the people that I knew. I could go around and look at different people in my life, and I can see that people that are good in deeds and bad in words, or people that are really big in words, but their follow-up is really bad. They don't have deeds.
Right.
And I can see people that really struggle at all things in life, don't have good words or good deeds. And so I put together this chart and this assessment, and I started asking questions of literally hundreds of men. And it was really cool what developed. And then so I proposed my work to Nav Press, and fortunately the senior editor there really appreciated it and felt like men could be inspired by this and it could help a lot of men. So he decided to take on the project and publish the book. Both the publisher, Don Pape, and the senior editor, David Zimmerman. So appreciate those men of God. And so we started working together, and I developed this assessment, and then we made it an online diagnostic for men to take. And the basic component of it is that both words and deeds are important, and we need both to live a successful life, the life that God has called us to. Because it's great if you have a man that has a lot of good deeds, but if he's unable to communicate the importance of those, or to communicate tenderness to his wife or his daughter and tell him why he does these good deeds, then a lot of opportunities are lost. And in the same way, if you have a good man that is great with his words, a great encourager, somebody that builds into the lives of his kids and wives and coworkers, but there's no follow through. And I've worked with men like this my whole life where, they'll say things to you, but then they don't follow through. They'll say, hey, I'll spend this time with you tomorrow, or I'll help you move on Saturday, or I'll go to this training program with you next week. And then it's like I'm sorry. Yeah, my schedule's changed. And it's just so disappointing. And I saw that in my own life as well. There were a lot of things I needed to shore up in both my words and my deeds. And so I just started looking more at what integrity means and how that all fits together. And I really believe that this is what God just outlined in His Word so much, that having integrity is important. And one of the ways to have integrity is that your words match your deeds, that your audio matches your video, and you're not a duplicitous person, that you're consistent, and your kids can count on you when you tell them you're going to be there for their ball game, or you tell your wife that, yeah, we can visit your parents next month, that you commit to that, and it doesn't change if, a hunting party decides to, go out that you really wanted to do or something like that. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely. That's amazing. That's awesome. And I think that I think we'll touch on brotherhood later, but we have actually been having these kind of conversations with our group of men that we have a brotherhood with, of like the commitment and everything that we have to each other in the group and things like that. And it lines right up with that, which is awesome. And just going into the book, just so we've just a little background here for everybody listening. Me and Brandon have had the book for a little bit now. We've both done the assessment that's in it, and it's awesome. I can't agree any more with the recommendation that's on the cover. This is a must read. You will be a better person after applying the insights in this book. Like that's really, I think, the best way to sum it up. I know personally at work we've had to do like a personality test, and like my wife's really big on the Enneagram test and personality stuff and things like that, where you take assessments to learn about emotional intelligence and things like that, which I think is incredibly valuable. I know if Mike Monty's listening to this, he's gonna hate it, but I think is incredibly valuable. But the cool thing about like doing the assessment in this book was you're not just like stuck with where it is. Like if it's like, oh, I'm a person, it ends up I'm a man with high words and no deeds. Like that's where I am for the rest of my life. Like I guess I'm just stuck here. There's a lot of like practical things to then take you out. How do you move? How do you be better in those? How do you become a man of courageous integrity, like it says, which is awesome.
Thank you. That's something I'd like to follow up on, and that is just to say that was the whole thesis of the book, is that it's not you're not forever anchored in your quadrant like you might be with Myers-Briggs. It really is just a starting point. It's something for men to take and then forget about, but try to be a man of words and actions, because, we pattern our life after Christ. And I have a chapter in there that Christ was the master statesman. Right. He was the perfect person as far as having fully synthesized words and deeds. Everything he said, he did. And the book was written so that men could be inspired to live more godly lives, more like Christ, and maybe to see some gaps in their life. And that's why I encourage people to, with the online assessment, it's totally anonymous. I don't capture the data of anybody that takes it, but it does allow you to, send the link to 3 friends, and they can take it for you. And I've done it with 3 different, I did it with 3 work associates. I did it with 3 family members. I just wanted to see how they saw I was doing, because we can take it ourselves, and depending on how honest we are with ourselves, we get one result. But then when you have your wife and your daughter and your son take it, or you have your boss and a couple of coworkers take it, they can maybe be a little more severe in areas that were blind spots. And I just trying to bring men some self-awareness. But even with that, even if they ended up a century and different people rated them as a century, I really hope the book is hopeful in that it says you can start today, and the things you say follow up on, and you'll be a man of integrity today. It's both a long process and it's a short process, if you know what I mean. I mean, to be known as a man of character and integrity can take some time, but to start having that is immediate. And that's what I want to encourage men to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you mind me asking, when you created the assessment, what you were when you first took it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was a salesman. It was high. I mean, my scores were, I can't remember exactly what the scores were, and I was surprised at that. I was like, oh man, that hurt. I'm the one developing this whole thing. Right. And I ended up being, and it's kind of awkward, because I was arranging I was the creator of the questions,
sure.
So it was weird. But I tried to do an honest assessment when I got kind of the core of the questions I had, and at the time it was just a 32 question test instead of a 40 question. But when I got the core of it, I thought, okay, now what if I go back and answer these all myself and try to be as honest as possible? And I ended up being in the range of salesmen. And as I thought about it and prayed about it, I thought, God, it's so true. I can talk with people a bigger game than I actually am. And if somebody had a video camera and followed me around 24 hours a day, they might be like, what the heck? You're a chaplain and a pastor and you call yourself a Christian, but what is this? And I thought, yeah, I can talk a bigger game than what I am. And it was pretty convicting, because my family, I have grown kids now, and I'll tell you, grown kids can be so brutally honest with you, and they can show you your blind spots and things. And so just talking to them and talking to my wife about how can I be a better man of integrity? How can I serve you more? How can I be more, do what I say? And that's why, in the very first, I think it's the preamble of the book, I share a story about what it's all about. And I say that the material in this book changed my life, and I pray that it will change yours too. And it's not so much that it's a magical formula. It's just, as men read through the book, they can just say, hey, am I a man of integrity or not? What do I need to do to change my life so that I can be a man of integrity? Because that's what I believe the Lord calls us to.
Yeah, and for the men that are listening to this, because we've mentioned, obviously, the words of salesman and statesman and all a couple of times, and they're probably thinking, what is that? Before we get into our next part, could you explain to them what exactly the 4 different types of man are? The sentry, the salesman, the scout, and the statesman. Just a quick detail about each one, just so the men listening can understand briefly what we're talking about, and also interest them into why they should read this book.
Yeah, no problem. So that's the really fun part of the book, is where each man reading it takes a 40-question diagnostic device, and it puts them, much like a Myers-Briggs, it puts them into one of 4 categories. If they score low in words and deeds, it makes them a sentry. And I use that word just because it's one who has few words and few actions. They literally stand there and do nothing, guard their post. If they score high in words and low in deeds, it would make a man a salesman, one who's known for his good use of words. If a man scores low in words and high in deeds, it would make him a scout, one who has plenty of good deeds but needs to be stealthy and not so wordy. And then the final type of man is one who scores high in both words and deeds, and that person I call a statesman. It's one who's an ambassador and someone who maybe negotiates treaties on behalf of nations. They're truly the leader of leaders. And in one chapter, like I mentioned before, I described the master statesman, who's Jesus, a man plentiful with good works and good deeds. So the arc of the book is truly to help men pattern their life after Christ. And the whole project concludes with a chapter called You as Statesman. So in the book, I describe each character type and explain how they function in 4 very important areas in life: relationships, stress, teamwork, and leadership. And what's fun is that we have all of us have met these 4 types of men, and we work with them every day. Men like salesmen who make a lot of commitments to you, but they may not be showing up when you need them to, or when they promised. So that's kind of the core of the book.
Like I said, we took the test. I was a scout, and Brandon was actually a statesman already. So I think he cheated and read the book first and then did the assessment. But
Don't listen to him.
no, I'm just joking.
Tended to see that people a lot of times they'll underscore themselves. So I'm convinced you guys are probably where you are or should be even better. So,
which is the same thing that I thought about Taylor, is that I think he's actually a statesman, because brief background, because you're learning about us, Taylor and I, and Taylor's the main disciple that I've had in my life the past few years. So when we actually took the test, we looked at each other, sat down, we were like, hey, let's go over our results. And he said his, I said mine. I was like, I think they should be flipped the other way, like, because I look at him to be the statesman. So you're what you just said is 100% accurate, that you underscore yourself. So Taylor thinking is a scout, where I think, no, I think you're actually a statesman. So it was actually a very unique assessment. Like you said, you had family members do it and kids, and doing it with a friend as well, someone as close as what Taylor and I am. It was great to do it, side by side with him. So
yeah, good.
So yeah, to kind of start to wrap up what we're talking about, I found a quote in your book that you said, and I think it goes great with brotherhood. And I would love to, obviously tell you, you wrote the book, but I'm going to say the quote that I pulled from it. And could you give our listeners some advice on brotherhood, what you've gone through in your life, your career in the military, and just your friends in general? This is what the quote reads: "When men speak encouraging words to others and perform deeds of valor, they become everything the master made them to be, and they encourage other men to do the same." And when I read that, I immediately thought brotherhood. Like, that struck me to the core, exactly of what Taylor and I have envisioned with Brothers of Merit and our group of men that we have in our lives that hold us accountable. So with that quote, could you, give us some advice for our listeners and Taylor and I, because we need it just as much as they do, on brotherhood?
Yeah, I absolutely. I'll tell you a story too. We just recently, I told you my dad, he has severe dementia now and Alzheimer's, and we just had to relocate him from his home in New Jersey down to Alabama so he could be with my brother. And the last Sunday of the church, we notified the pastor that this was his last Sunday, and the pastor actually, he had the book and he read that quote out of my book. But he was talking about my dad, and he told the congregation, he said, this is a man, and he's talking about Calvin Causey, that exemplifies these words. And I think brotherhood has so many facets to it. It gets right to the core of who we are as men. And I believe, men need other men in their lives, whether it's mentor, father, best friend, even my sons. I need my sons in my life. There's something about having other men going through the challenges of life alongside of us or ahead of us, maybe 20 years ahead of us or 30 years, and behind us, that is encouraging. And I believe that God has designed us in a way where we get great encouragement by relating to other men. And we all know that great verse, and it's a men's ministry: as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And I love my wife, and I love my daughters, and I have a great relationship with them. But there is something about male friendship and a brotherhood of men that it strikes to the core of who I am. And it helps me see who God is more. It helps me be encouraged to live the life and to walk with integrity. And when I see mentors in my own life that have struggled, even the point of saying they've considered suicide and different things like that, it actually encourages me when men are real with each other and vulnerable and transparent. And I think that's a community that Christ has called us to, is when we get with other men, that we can be open and honest. And we're not all going to succeed with integrity. We obviously, divorce is very common. Pornography addiction is very common, drug addiction. But to be real with each other and to be honest and to walk in life with each other, that for me is what life is about. And it's about encouraging each other and being honest about where I'm at as well. I could keep talking, but we're probably going too late. So.
No, that was amazing. Taylor and I were literally just looking at each other saying, like, shaking our heads, like, this is exactly what our listeners needed to hear. I mean, this is to the point what we are going at as Brothers of Merit is brotherhood, and everything that you just said hit the nail on the head. It's amazing. And it's so funny because twice now in this interview, we've gone over times where it's like almost as if this interview was meant to be. Because the first time, Taylor was going over this book and his thoughts of it, and you basically said that was the exact thesis for that book in my head. And the second part was, I can't believe that I pulled that quote out of your entire book, and that's the quote that was read for your father, for the church. And it's amazing to me. Just God works in awesome ways, and to see that those two things just aligned is exactly why we loved having you and wanted to have you on our show. Because when we read about you and your history and your book, we just knew that you should be on this show for our listeners.
Hey, thanks. It's been a privilege. I want to encourage y'all with what you're doing and the impact that you have on other men. It's very hard to be a man these days and to understand what a man is supposed to be, and how we're supposed to live. There's so many negative influences in our society, but God's word is true, and his Bible is helpful to us to live every day and to encourage each other. And part of that is making good male friendships and keeping each other accountable and being honest with each other and living lives of integrity.
Just as we wrap up here, would you mind telling the listeners where they can find your online assessment, where they can find your book, where they can get plugged into anything else that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the basic website where everything is called CauseyBooks.com, CauseyBooks.com. And on the very front page of that is the online integrity assessment that you can click on and take it. And it gives you your results, but it doesn't spell out all that means. It'll just say, words 12, deeds 9, you're a salesman. But I want to encourage men to grab the book, to learn about whatever it is they found that they are. On the website, too, you'll see other resources. There's other books for men, for your marriage. We have our first ever Words and Deeds men's conference is going to take place in Lynchburg, Virginia on May 4th. That we're really excited about. We're trying to get the word out to churches in the area and men's groups. We'd love for men to, fill up a car, fill up a van, and come join us that Saturday, May 4th, at a church in Lynchburg, so we can talk more about what it means to be a man of God and to live lives of integrity. We have some great speakers lined up, and just really want as many men as possible to be there. One of my hobbies is studying history. And I recently published a book on World War II with comparing Corrie ten Boom, who hid Jews in her attic in Holland, and in her bedroom. It was a secret room in her bedroom. But also Albert Speer, who was Hitler's best friend. And I go back and forth in that book between them. And now I have a book. I've just finished research on Treblinka extermination camp. I got back from Poland a few weeks ago. And I collaborate with the museum directors and have their consent to write these books. But Treblinka was one of the least known camps. It possibly killed more people than Auschwitz and in a more compacted timeline, but we don't know much about Treblinka. So I've studied a lot about it, and I have a book hopefully coming out in the next year on Treblinka called Trains to Treblinka. But yeah, so it's just different passions I have, and that is for men to encourage men and live lives of integrity, and also just studying history and some of the things that happened in our wars. As a soldier, I'm kind of drawn to that, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, thanks a ton. We thoroughly enjoyed our time talking with you. Our listeners are going to love this. We got a lot out of it, so we appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, so there you have it, guys. That was the interview with Colonel Charles Causey. As we told you at the beginning, we really enjoyed it, and I know after you guys have now listened to it, you'll see why that we did. The assessment in his book was great, and the moments where, they pulled the same quote from his book that I did was just amazing. And the fact that you explained to him your feelings on the book, and he said that was my exact thought on the thesis of it. It was just, it's so wild to me that how God works,
Right, and that story when the guy came back, just like I said, I was sitting there just with goosebumps. That was awesome. So, with that, you guys can find his book at Amazon.com. It's probably the easiest way to find it. You can just search Word and Deeds, as well as on our website, brothersofmerit.com. We have a past guests tab where you can find links to his website, links to find his book, links to get involved in things that he's doing.
Yep. And also in our show description notes, we'll have the link like we usually do for his website. So on that note, we'll end it out. Next week's episode, we'll have Jesse Schumann, who is the E-Group and Outreach Director from Steve Furtick's church, Elevation Church, based in North Carolina. So it's going to be a great episode. We're looking forward to having him, and I know you guys will love listening to it as usual. So we will talk to you guys next week.
See ya.
See ya.